بلا هبل تعال.
بس هاتي خذي امسحي. اي ما هو جاهز امسحي. مش مشكلة.
There are two hypotheses to explain the conflict. According to conventional wisdom, the root of the conflict is the lack of Palestinian self-determination, and what the Palestinians aspire to is to establish a state of their own. There is, however, an alternative hypothesis which holds that the root of the conflict is not the absence of Palestinian self-determination, but the existence of Jewish self-determination. And as long as the Jewish self-determination exists, there will be fuel for the conflict. What the Palestinians aspire to is not to establish a state for themselves, but dismantle a state for the Jews. The conventional hypothesis cannot explain, for instance, why the Palestinians have rejected every single territorial compromise which would have allowed them to establish a state. It cannot explain Palestinian rhetoric and symbolism where the whole of the land of Israel, from the Jordan to the sea, is presented as Palestinian, as Arab Palestine. It cannot explain not only the actual rejection of the Barak proposals, but the manner in which they were rejected. Because if the Barak proposals were only marginally short of Palestinian demands, then one would imagine that they would negotiate the difference. But instead their response was massive violence, which seems to indicate that not only did the proposals fall considerably short of their expectations, but the Barak demand of end of conflict was unacceptable for them.
Point their finger on the Palestinians to say they are not ready for a peace, and that the Palestinians are terrorists. This is not true. The Palestinians are ready for peace, and they are not terrorists, and they want to make peace with the Israelis, and they support Abu Mazen in his peace efforts. They supported Yasser Arafat in his peace efforts. It was Yasser Arafat who made the Palestinian people accept this agreement of 22% of the total area of historic Palestine. But the Israelis, there is no leader on the Israeli side who can match the Palestinian will to make peace with the Israeli side.
you have to sit down with your enemies, not with your friends, with your enemies, to mix the two very different narratives, which are different. There is no truth in this conflict, and to find a common denominator that will enable us to go forward. About 8 years ago, on the 4th of September 1997, Thursday afternoon, 3 o'clock, two Palestinian suicide bombers blew themselves up in Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, which is about 500 meters away from this place. And they killed themselves. They killed 5 people. Among them 3 little girls, 14 years old. One of them was my 14 years old daughter's mother.
In every public opinion survey that's been taken in recent years of Palestinian public opinion, we see that well over 80% supports reconciliation with Israel, supports the concept of a two-state solution, and supports an end to the violence if the occupation will end as well.
Many people think that the other side does not want peace. This is one of the biggest problems, because when people don't talk to each other, this is one of the biggest problems when Israelis do not learn Arabic in school, although we have so many Arabic people surrounding us. And so one of the biggest problems is that people from both sides believe that the other side is not willing for peace.
It was about 7 o'clock evening. So I drove my car, I went my home, and I looked into the mirror. I saw my brother driving his car. I turned to the right, I went down, and after a few minutes I heard a bullet. One shot. And I felt that something terrible happened. You know, to my experience from the first intifada and the starting of the second intifada, that if we hear one bullet, it's mean a life emulsion, and this mean it's a selected target, or someone is wounded, or someone was shot. But when we hear a huge ta-ta-ta-ta like this, an automatic shooting gun, we notice that the army try to keep the people away, the kids away. You know, it's just shooting in the air. So I saw his car coming down straight. It was like a rocket, so fast. And I said, I noticed that someone was wearing a white T-shirt with a red color, which means the blood. And I saw a lot of people inside the car, and I said something terrible happened, either to my brother, to his friend, or to someone that my brother was very close to. So I said, how is he? He said it's in his head, but we hope that he will manage. And I said, is he my brother? He said, yes. You don't know? I said, no. I drove my car. I went to my brother's home, and I can't believe the whole town was there. It's just something like you spread a tear gas in the air. It's something that's people crying with tears, and but nobody knows that he's dead. We know that he's still alive, but he's in a very bad, serious condition, because the bullet came here in his head, and they explode and turn up all his mind. But we didn't know that he died that moment.
I was invited to a house in Dheisheh. Dheisheh is a refugee camp near Bethlehem, with my family. And we talked with about 40 people of the camp, which is, for me, it's a miracle. to be able to do it, to show them that not all Israelis are soldiers, not all Israelis are settlers.
Sometimes while I'm back home from the school, I see the soldiers shooting and this, what's terrible thing is happening. I insist I go back home to stay at my home and then study to prepare myself for the next day to go back to school.
فأنا أمنيتي في هالحياة إنه يعني يصير السلام ونعيش كلنا شعوب مع بعض. يعني بلاش الحرب هاي، ليش يعني شو بستفيدوا منها؟ نقتل بعض لبعض ولا إيش يعني؟
I wish that we can live all together in freedom and dignity, all the nations, to live as a normal life that everybody want. And I'm wondering, asking why we have to fight each other, why we have to keep killing each other, what's the benefit of killing and war and bloodshed is keep running on?
Someone kills your 14 years old little girl, you are very angry, you want to get even. But then after a while you start to think, because we are people, we're not animals, we can use our heads instead of our guts, and you ask yourself questions. Will killing someone else will bring back my baby? Will causing pain to someone else will ease in any way my own pain? Of course not. So gradually, very slowly, you get to the other option, which is trying to understand what happened, why did it happen, how could such a horrible thing happen, what can drive someone to be that angry, that mad, that he's willing to kill himself with little girls.
76% of the people live on less than $2 a day. We are talking about 70% of our children are exposed to trauma, some kind of trauma. You are talking about unemployment, which has been skyrocketing. You are talking about GNP per capita dropped drastically to around $400. So you're talking about a bleak situation, if you like to say.
When you're faced with a threat, external threat, the way you deal with it is not through dominating and control the other, because Israel has been dominating and controlling Palestinians for 37 years, and far from making that whatever threat there was go away, it has intensified the threat considerably by occupation, by domination, and by an incredible level of insensitivity to the needs of the Palestinian people.
The land on which the settlements are built are Palestinian land. There are people who are living next to the settlements. They see their land usurped and they cannot even enter there and reclaim their land. This is one of the most, one of the ugliest instances of injustice done to any people anywhere in the land. You sit next to your land and you cannot do anything about it, because this land is controlled by force, by the force of the Israeli occupation. And the Israeli occupation is dependent on the Israeli army, which is maybe the fourth or the fifth strongest army in the world. We are no match for that.
There are a lot of factors in the animosity of Palestinians for Israel. There's not a family that hasn't lost a loved one or had a loved one arrested or otherwise injured. The fear of knowing someone can break down your door in the middle of the night and come in and arrest someone with no legal apparatus whatsoever. All of this contributes to the hostility of the Palestinian population. It's not at all surprising, and it's an inevitable result of having been dealt with so poorly for so many years.
It is very, very hard right now for a number of reasons. I mean, the blockades and the seizures have made basic commerce almost impossible. The unemployment rate is well over 50%. The bombardments of civilian areas has been widespread. A lot of people don't recognize that far more Palestinian civilians have died from Israelis than Israelis have died from attacks by Palestinians.
Still, we are living under the Israeli occupation. We live in small areas, isolated from others, as a result either of the siege or the curfew in some places, or as a result of building the wall, or the cluster of settlements that surround each district. And so the economic situation is deteriorating.
The economy is collapsing, and the democracy is also collapsing. What we have now in Israel is only a virtual democracy.
The Israel-Palestinian conflict is one major manifestation of the wrong paradigm. The wrong paradigm is the paradigm that says that security comes through domination and control over others rather than through generosity and kindness and cooperative relations with others.
I think basically the two nations are so similar in taste, in food, in color, in language, in everything. And they are so close that we need to break down this wall.
We have paid a price in human casualties, over 1,000 people in the last 5 years alone, tens of thousands who've been wounded over the years. We pay an economic price for the occupation. $1.5 billion goes every year just for maintenance of the settlements in the territories, and that does not even include the larger costs of purchasing planes or large weapons. Because we give so much money into the occupation, we in Israel have had to cut back on all our basic programs, our schools, our hospitals, our youth programs, our elderly programs, disabled programs. We have no more money for that because we're throwing it into the endless pit of support for the settlements.
After this killing, my daughter Lara, she was that time almost 8 years old, and she asked me, "Father, see what the Israeli have done to you. You work for peace, you do for peace, and they killed your brother just like that. Is that the peace you want?" I said, "No." She said, "Then why you keep on working for peace?" I said, "Because of you, because of my brother kids." I mean, is to keep in the circle, the same circle, the bloodshed circle, the revenge circle, start by killing and will not end by killing.
Only 10 years ago, and 10 years is nothing in history. 10 years is... If you would have come to an Israeli or a Palestinian telling them that one day the leader of the PLO will shake the hand of the Prime Minister of Israel on the balcony of the White House, nobody would ever believe you. Yet it did happen. And the two sides went from total denial of each other to understanding the basic problems of the conflict.
She used to wake up at midnight, screaming, shouting. And I said, "What's?" She said, "Army, shooting." When she used to hear at at night or daytime, the shooting, a very heavy shooting, she screamed, she shout, she cry. I said, "Why are you crying? They are shooting very far away from here." She said, "They will kill us." So how to take out this fear, this scare from her? So I start taking her, pulling her with me to go to the checkpoint. I ask her to say something bad to the soldier. I know it's a crazy thing from my side, but I said, you live one time and you die one time. So she said, "No, Father, no." She's scared. She said, "They will shoot us." I said, "No." And then one day the soldier catch me, say, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because this is what you made my daughter to be. I don't want to lose my daughter. Yeah, I don't want to live. I don't want her to live to be like crazy, to feel scary, to all the time to be frightened. She doesn't let us at night to sleep. So he said, "Don't you afraid that we will shoot now because أنا شو كنت أقول لك تسوي للجيش؟
أتف عليهم
كيف
وأغلط
تفي
عليهم.
تفي كيف كنت تسوي للجيش؟ This is what she said that she used to do. And she said to me, Father, I said, no, they will shoot us, they will shoot us if we say bad or if we say good things. So let us do it. Now she's not afraid. I know it was very risky to do this, but I want her to be a normal person.
With two different kinds of reactions. When I grew up, the response of the people I knew, my generation, was, such a thing must never happen again. We grew up with a tremendous sensitivity to every aspect of what was done to Jews. That there could be bystanders who could see Jews being deported and do nothing and go on with their daily life. I found that horrific. What does it mean to be a bystander? It's untenable. A bystander is a collaborator. I felt a sense of moral outrage. And that made me feel that there should never be genocide, murder, or bystanders, ever, anywhere. Now then there were those who grew up and said, Jews were victims of the Nazis, and Jews must never again be victims. So the question is, some of us said, because of the Holocaust, Israel has a special responsibility to treat Palestinians with decency and equality. And then there were others who said, Jews have a responsibility after the Holocaust to make sure that no Jew is ever again in danger.
I don't know if this happened, what if that I lost my brother. I don't know what I could done if I lost my one of my son, one of my kid. I don't know. I have no answer for that. Would I be able to resume, to continue my peace duty? I don't know.
Here you have the place where the very idea about the possibility of a world based on love emerged. And in that very place, the peoples who were supposedly committed to that vision of a world based on love are actually acting hatefully towards each other. So it's very hard to convince anybody else on the planet that these are plausible values if in the very core of the place where these ideas emerge, the people who articulate those ideas are actually killing each other off and acting in hateful ways.
I said, you walk alone. By the Kalandia checkpoint, which is a very famous checkpoint between Jerusalem and Ramallah, which is in the center of the West Bank. So I walk and I said, you walk alone, Lara. You are not anymore young, you are strong, you have nothing to be frightened from.
سألني حتى وين أبوك قلت له أبوي هي هناك أنا ماشي حالي.
بتحكيها بالإنجليزي.
And the soldier asked me, where's your father? I told him, my father not here. She walk alone.
He walk alone.
He walk alone.
And I'm following.
Yes.
أنا بتبع أبوي. I'm following.
And I'm following my father.
Huh. So you are not afraid anymore?
No.
Why you afraid before?
Because I see the soldier when he's shooting my uncle, and when he's everybody, every Palestinian, every baby, every woman, man, everything.
It's not a battle between bad and good. There are no two sides here. Israel is occupying and oppressing and humiliating 3.5 million people without any democratic right for the last 40 years. And this is not Judaism. And this is wrong. And this must not be supported in any way.
You can hear the Israeli generals and the Israeli ministers saying day and night that international law, and specifically the Geneva Convention, do not hold for Israel because this is war against terror.
Yesterday morning I was bringing some guests to see the wall, and I was ashamed, and I lost hope.
The model after which the wall is built is the model of the Gaza Strip. In the Gaza Strip, the wall, the electronic fence and the system of fences was built already after, shortly after the Oslo agreements in '93, and it was built by Rabin, Yitzhak Rabin, the previous prime minister.
Israel, like any country, certainly has the right to secure its borders, and that is by a wall or a fence or by whatever else. They certainly have a right to do that, particularly given the recent history of terrorist attacks inside the country and everything.
I don't think Israel is more secure when Sharon builds this wall and, for example, builds it deep into Palestinian territory.
The problem is the wall is not being built along Israel's recognized border. It's being extended well into occupied parts of the West Bank. Indeed, the wall, when it's completed, will be more than 3 times longer than it would be were to continue along the pre-67 borders. And it's pretty obvious from the way they're routing it is that it's a land grab. They are taking huge tracts of fertile farmland from Palestinian farmers and in some cases literally surrounding these towns, no way in, no way out, except with the permission of the Israeli occupation authorities. Often they're building them in places where it's not Israelis on one side, Palestinians on others, but right through the middle of Palestinian communities, separating extended families from each other. And of course, in the Palestinian culture, extended families are incredibly important.
Israel as occupier is doing here exactly what the Geneva Convention does not allow it to do. It's imprisoning the people rather than protecting them, imprisoning.
It's a real tragedy on a very immediate humanitarian level, but even beyond that, it's basically setting in concrete the illegal Israeli annexation of these large swaths of territory. And again, that's not only, I think, bad news in terms of any hope of Israeli-Palestinian peace, but it is violating the very fundamental principle of the UN Charter that was reiterated in UN Security Council Resolutions 242 and 338, long seen as the basis of the peace, that no country can expand its territory by military force. And the effective endorsement of this policy by President Bush, by Senator Kerry, by leaders of both parties has really set back the efforts of moderate Israelis and moderate Palestinians to reach a settlement that recognizes the just aspirations of both peoples.
In the West Bank, the wall is built in the way that it incorporates in the Israeli side all the settlement blocks and much more. If you look at the full map of the wall, it's not being implemented yet fully. It annexes 40% of the West Bank to Israel. 40% of the West Bank will be in the Israeli side of the border if it's completed.
The main interest of the United States in the region is not a big secret. That's where the oil is. Israel made a decision, really fateful decision, in 1971. The decision was whether to pursue accommodation with its neighbors, internal peace. The chances were there. Egypt had offered a full peace treaty. It would have removed the main Arab state from the conflict. Jordan was going along, would have accepted a full peace treaty. The Palestinians were not a force. Nobody else in the region was going to act in opposition to that. They had the chance, and the chance was, shall we accept security, accommodation into the region, peaceful future recognition, or shall we choose expansion? At that point, the main issue was expansion into the northern Sinai. This was a labor government, remember. This is Golda Meir's labor government, what are called doves now. They were committed to expansion in the northern Sinai. They had expelled thousands of farmers, Bedouins, from their lands, destroyed the communities, bulldozed the villages, the mosques, the cemeteries, drove them into the desert, all to build, they're planning to build an all-Jewish city, Yamit, in the northern Sinai, which there was some settlement in the West Bank then, but not much. It was scattered. This was the big program, and that meant, of course, no peace with Egypt. So they decided to reject the Egyptian proposal, and then came, which means reliance on the United States, because if they do not accept peace, they're going to be in a constant situation of conflict, and that means they must have outside support, and the only outside support they're going to get is from the United States. So it was a decision, in effect, to become completely dependent on the United States for survival, for the course that they would follow.
The United States has had a long history, both during and since the Cold War, to be wary of radical nationalist movements that might challenge the status quo. As a result, the United States has been a major supporter of Israel diplomatically, economically, and strategically for quite a number of years now.
The crucial question in 1971 was, what would the U.S. do? Would it accept Nasser's proposals, which in fact were almost perfectly in accord with U.S. official policies, or would they back Israel's rejection of these proposals? There was an internal conflict. Kissinger won it. Kissinger's position, as he's written, was that there should be no negotiations, just what he called stalemate. Our position should be stalemate, meaning rely on force, not diplomacy. That's standard Kissinger position. That won out. That led directly to the 1973 war, which was almost a disaster. And then it sort of goes on from there.
After 9/11, Sharon and other Israeli leaders started comparing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to the U.S. war on terror. So immediately they drew the analogy quite explicitly. They said that Palestinians are terrorists just like Al-Qaeda, so Israel's war against the Palestinians is a war against terror.
In a way, the direction the United States has taken over the course of the past several years since 9/11 has been one that we didn't have to go that direction if we had learned the right lessons from Israel-Palestine.
They already have the most advanced military force, not only in the region, but in NATO. I mean, Israel literally has a larger and more advanced air force than any NATO power outside the United States. That's a small country, and the only reason it can do that is because it's kind of like an offshore military base of the United States.
Israel has not yet taken the full measure, the full scale that the U.S. has been taking, but they are doing a slow process of genocide, of killing the Palestinians. Since then, there were many operations in Gaza, where again the army enters for a week and sows destruction.
If the U.S. was concerned with solely with Israel's security, if they saw the situation as a struggling democracy about to be overrun by the Arab hordes, most U.S. aid to Israel would have come in Israel's first 20 years of existence, when its strategic situation was most vulnerable and its democratic institutions were strongest. Instead, 99% of all U.S. aid to Israel has taken place after 1967, when Israel found itself more powerful than any combination of Arab armies and found itself the occupiers of a large Arab population.
They returned the military rule that was there in Israel before the Oslo period, the Oslo agreements. They returned it fully in the West Bank.
It seems that every president now supports Israel fully. The question is that really support? That is the American government supporting Israel or using Israel for its own purposes?
Indeed, the stronger Israel has become militarily compared to its neighbors, and the more oppressive it's become in the occupied territories, the more U.S. aid has poured in.
The same methods that the U.S. employs in Iraq would also be appropriate and approved for Israel. So as as the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq started, they assumed that Israel can use the same measures.
It's less of a situation of a moral commitment to Israel, which I think personally is a good thing, to have a moral commitment to Israel's survival as a free, democratic, and secure Jewish state. But it has become a sense of using Israel as a strategic outpost on a single aircraft carrier to advance American strategic objectives in the region.
When Israel showed its military might in 1967 and performed services later, it just fell naturally into this pattern. And it was an easier one than the others because it's a Western country, at least its dominant element. So it could have close relations with the U.S. and economically, socially, culturally, and so on in a way that, say, Turkey couldn't or Iran couldn't.
The threat of Israel's overwhelming military power is enough to try to keep the status quo intact. Remember, they've suppressed radical nationalist movements, not just within Palestine, but in Jordan and Lebanon as well. They have funneled arms to third parties the U.S. could not give arms to directly for political reasons, ranging from Iran's mullahs to apartheid South Africa, to the Guatemalan junta, to the Nicaraguan Contras.
Without American support, the Israeli government will not be flaunting all international regulations and laws. Without American support, financial and political support, the Israeli government would not be occupying the land since 1967, despite the general consensus in the international community that the Israeli occupation should be terminated and the Israelis should withdraw to the borders of the 4th of June 1967. Without American support, the Israeli means of torture, of subduing the Palestinian people would not be that refined as it is now.
It was an obvious base for projection of American power in the region, and it had a kind of a tacit alliance with the ruling families of the oil producers. In fact, U.S. intelligence in the early 70s was discussing what they called a tripartite alliance between Saudi Arabia, Iran under the Shah, and Israel, with Turkey in the background, and of course the U.S. running the show in general. I mean, that's what it meant to be a strategic asset.
The Air Force controls the sky in the region. The military-industrial complexes of the two countries are very tightly intertwined.
The economy is very similar to the U.S., high-tech economy, crucially based on military-related industry, tied very closely to same sectors in the United States.
Everything from new jet fighters to anti-missile defense systems. And so they are, in a sense, a junior partner in this design for greater American-led hegemonic control in the region.
There have been important domestic pressure groups in the United States that press policy towards what's called support for Israel. I mean, partly it's organized Jewish community, but that's only a part of it. I mean, a large part of it is liberal intellectuals who were very impressed with Israel's victory in 1967. Israel's 67 victory won at a lot of points in the United States, not just politically, but also for other reasons. You have to remember what was happening here. That was the peak of the Vietnam War.
The U.S. policy is now returning to a policy of direct occupation. That's a big change compared to the policy, at least since Vietnam. They are now going back to occupying countries. And on that, they did not hide that they had a lot to learn from Israel. Israel has a big experience in occupying another people and controlling it, another state militarily. And the U.S. have sent agents to study the policies, and it's completely open that they have learned in several areas.
Probably a lot that the U.S. could learn from Israeli technology, from as I said, counterintelligence measures, perhaps in its the resolve of the population to not disrupt its normal course of life.
From a U.S. administration perspective, the major achievement of Israel is in gathering intelligence. That's the one thing that Israel managed to do during the years of occupation. They managed to plant collaborators almost everywhere in the occupied territories. And much of the control is done via local collaborators that also provide information, but also provide also sometimes use manipulation to direct the people to use lines of actions that would be appropriate, convenient for Israel at the time.
It became more and more to mimic the United States. By now it's the most unequal society in the industrial world outside the United States. Huge poverty like the United States, destruction of their social system, social welfare system, which was pretty advanced at the time. And in many respects it's becoming socially, economically, psychologically more and more like the master, which you could expect, plus more and more conflict.
They've kept pro-Soviet and radical nationalist governments like Syria in check. They've crushed radical nationalist movements in Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon. Mossad and CIA cooperate in intelligence gathering and covert operations. The military-industrial complexes of the two countries are intertwined.
There's corporate interests. I mean, U.S. corporations, especially the high-tech, military-oriented, are very closely linked to Israel. I mean, Intel sets up plants there. Israeli scientists and technologists come here. So there's all kinds of connections that contributed over and above the strategic asset analysis. And people debate, the relative importance, and you could argue about it, but I think they're all there. And at the core of it was a strategic analysis, which remains. I mean, that's why the United States, since 1971, has consistently refused to accept the political settlement. And it's been almost totally isolated on this. I mean, if you take a look at the United Nations or, European proposal, Arab state proposals, the International Court advisory opinion on the wall.
To give a blank check for actions by Israel which are in violation of basic human rights standards, international law, is, I think, both morally wrong, but also, I think, creates an enormous anti-American reaction.
Just take case after case without exception, including the Clinton years. The U.S. has just blocked the international consensus.
In the long term, this unconditional support for Israel hurts American interests.
The majority of the American people favor, but the majority of the population does not have a popular voice in the United States. This is only a formal democracy.
It's important to offer some kind of formal security pact with Israel, just to underscore that we are not abandoning Israel. We support its right to exist in peace and security, and that position is unshakable. And with that in place, to then put pressure, including withholding all or part of our generous economic and military aid, to insist that Israel abide by outstanding UN Security Council resolutions and other basic principles of international law regarding their colonization of the occupied territories and other violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention.
There has been a very broad international consensus, almost universal, on the shape of a political settlement. Majority of the American public supports it. The U.S. government has opposed it consistently, still does, and Israel's opposed it. And that's why the conflict goes on.
It's encouraging extremists and encouraging anti-Americanism throughout the Arab and Islamic world. In the short to medium term, there's a certain logic to it.
Israel had just performed two great services for the United States. One was in 1967 when they destroyed Nasser, which was the center of secular Arab nationalism and also a pillar of the non-aligned movement, both of which the United States was very hostile to. Okay, they knocked the props out from under that. That's when the Israel-U.S. relationship really strengthens. In 1970, they performed another service. Jordan was carrying out a massacre of Palestinians since Black September, and it looked for a time as if Syria might intervene to protect Palestinians. But the U.S. couldn't do much about it. The U.S. was completely mired in Indochina. It was right after the invasion of Cambodia. This country was practically blowing up, and the universities were closed. There were protests all over. I mean, they just couldn't carry out another intervention. So they requested that Israel mobilize its air force in a clear demonstration that if Syria moved, they were going to attack Syria. Syria backed off, and the massacre of Palestinians continued. And U.S. aid to Israel, I think, quadrupled the next year.
Israel can impose its will on Arab populations, creating a reaction that only encourages extremist groups and the rise of terrorism. Or we can pursue a policy that recognizes that while we may need to take some targeted measures against specific terrorist threats like Al-Qaeda, which are very, very real, that we need to fundamentally address the underlying causes of terrorism.
The line the US is leading is that international law is an old-fashioned idea that is not fitting to the time of terror. And as part of it, your argument is part of the thinking. If the international law protects an evil state, nothing would ever stop them, right? So, but in fact, that is how it was always in history.
The United States, unfortunately, is quite capable of supporting its allies to invade and oppress and colonize and whatever neighboring countries if it's seen in the strategic interest of the United States.
The occupier always said it's the fault of the occupied that they are occupied. That's not anything new. What is new is the U.S. attempt to restore the view of justice and arrangements of the 19th centuries and before.
We did not need an Indonesian-American lobby to support Indonesia's brutal 24-year occupation of East Timor. We don't have a Moroccan-American lobby supporting, forcing the United States to support Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara.
I think Israel's facing extreme dangers. Let's take right now. There's I don't know what the probability is, but there's a fair chance that Israel will bomb Iran. The U.S. is beefing up their offensive military forces to enable them to do that.
What we really need to do is to have a policy of, if you will, tough love, that is unconditional support for Israel's right to exist in peace and security, but a willingness to challenge Israel forcefully about its occupation policies, not just because it's bad for the Palestinians, not just because it's making a mockery of basic international law, because ultimately it hurts Israel as well.
The United States has sent over 100 of its most advanced jet bombers to Israel with very open announcements that they can reach Iran and return, and they're providing them with what the Hebrew press in Israel calls special weapons, whatever that means, telling them the United States is setting up its satellite to bomb you.
I don't think if there wasn't an AIPAC that the U.S. would suddenly have a benign, progressive policy in the Middle East consistent with international law and human rights, because frankly we haven't had that kind of policy anywhere.
If the U.S. gives them the green light, then they do it, or maybe they'll even do it without a green light. Think what the reaction could be. I mean, we can't really guess, but the reaction could be blowing up the whole Middle East and putting Israel in tremendous danger. But in fact, maybe facing destruction.
There's this myth of Middle East exceptionalism in our foreign policy, but unfortunately our foreign policy has a lot in common with our foreign policy towards Central America, Southern Africa, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere.
I've felt and written for 30 years that the people who call themselves supporters of Israel are in fact supporters of Israel's moral degeneration, physical danger, and ultimate destruction, because that's where the policies are leading. And I think that's been clear since the occupation.
Maybe it will take a long time. It can take a year or 2 years or 500 years, like in the Irish case. The minute the price of not having peace will exceed the price of peace, then the two sides will crawl back to the negotiating table to start again exactly where they left off.
I think one of the biggest mistakes some people make who are critical of Israeli policies is to say that the problem with the US policy is that we're too pro-Israel, because ultimately I don't think we are being pro-Israel. Just because you're anti-Palestinian doesn't mean you're pro-Israel. We're being pro-Israel the way we were pro-South Vietnam in the 60s and pro-El Salvador in the 80s. We are supporting right-wing militarists who are pursuing policies that could ultimately lead to the country's destruction.
What will happen if we lived in peace? What's wrong? We wouldn't kill each other. We wouldn't break our each hearts one by one. That's what she say.
فأنا بطلب من العالم كله أن يوقف شعوب بشعوب معا لمعا ليكونوا السلام والأمل ويعملوا يعني مستحيل من أجل السلام، يعني نبطل نقتل بعض، نعيش بحرية سلام.
She said, I ask all the nations, all the people around the world that to work honestly in all the different ways is how to achieve this peace and not to keep killing each other. We should work on this.
هذا اللي بطلبه.
This is what I want, peace.